The 1969 Stonewall Riots helped ignite the modern gay rights movement.
Out of control. Go.
They weren't going to go back into the closet. They were going to go be out there, and they were going to be out and proud.
It was a perfect storm of years of oppression.
But Stonewall is just one moment in the history of LGBTQ life in America.
This is a story about acceptance and about identity.
Objects at the Smithsonian tell hundreds of these stories.
Matt dreamed of a happy ever after.
And they are still being written.
I'm getting hate mail all the time.
We are who we are, out and out and proud.
This can may not look like much, but it's one of just 2 artifacts at the Smithsonian Institution closest to a pivotal moment in American history. It happened in June 1969 at a New York tavern called the Stonewall Inn. Mark Siegel was there. He was 18 and gay. Back then, his nightlife options were limited.
In 1969, gay people had 0 rights. In the state of New York, if you served a known homosexual, you would lose your liquor license.
It was also illegal to dress outside gender norms.
In the 1960s, I could have been arrested for wearing the jeans I'm wearing because they zip up the front, not the back or the side. So these are men's jeans. They actually are, but because I like men's clothes better, mostly.
The Stonewall Inn was one of few places that accepted LGBTQ people.
Didn't matter that the drinks were watered down. Didn't matter that the glasses were dirty. That's all we could expect in our life at that point.
But police often raided the bar.
I mean, the things you heard were, oh, they didn't make their payoff this week, so that's why the police are coming in. Or you'd hear, oh, it's just one, some election is coming up, so they have to show that they're taking the ferries in. Or, oh, they're having a bad night with their wife, so they want to hassle us. Those are the kind of things you heard.
On June 28, 1969, something snaps, and the kids fight back, igniting violent demonstrations over several days.
I think in that moment, so many things came across in all our heads. We already watched how women had organized. We already watched how the black community had organized. It was time for us to organize and fight back.
It wasn't the first gay rebellion against police harassment, but it did spark a new attitude and activism around gay rights.
Stonewall was that final match, in a way, to light that fire and say, we are done with this. They weren't going to go back into the closet. They weren't going to go back into that bar and play by the rules of the NYPD. They were going to go be out there.
While Stonewall marked a turning point, it wasn't the beginning of LGBTQ life in the US. For centuries, their stories have been hidden away.
Partly because people didn't want to be known back then. People often destroyed records, burned your papers, your letters, anything that referenced a gender-fluid identity.
Smithsonian curators are digging into their collections for evidence of lives long overlooked.
If your story is not told, then you're not important. History and objects are like umbilical cords. They're like a superhighway to the past. And to the future, to those who come after us, will want to know, am I the only one in the world who has ever, in all of history, felt like this? And no matter what you're feeling, the answer is no. But that's why you need to to have people save stories so that you can find yourself.
Hidden stories of people daring to be themselves are now coming to light at the Smithsonian.
Come on, girls! Let's show them how we do it!
100 years before Stonewall, this costume was made for a gender-bending superstar. It was famously worn not by an actor, but by an actress, Charlotte Cushman, the Meryl Streep of her day.
She was the most famous American actress of the mid-19th century. Comedy, drama, female characters, male characters. She has a really broad repertoire.
Cushman became a star playing Romeo to her younger sister's Juliet, at a time when women often played male roles to accentuate their feminine anatomy.
When you're playing male roles like Romeo, the tights that extended below the breeches exposed women's legs, which was pretty rare, and it was seen as being risque. And so the performance was as much about sort of the titillating spectacle of going to see women's legs as it was about the actual acting.
But where she could, Cushman strove for authenticity and chose to hide her gender altogether. In 1857, she played another man, Cardinal Wolsey, in Shakespeare's Henry VIII.
Cushman has the costume designed in order to de-emphasize her body, right? You can't see the legs. She also has the robes cut very loosely so that it de-accentuates her bust.
Charlotte Cushman wears those, taking on a role that she couldn't take on in real life by making people forget that that's a woman in there. But it's an astounding performance.
Cushman's gender bending didn't stop when the curtain came down. She often dressed in men's riding jackets and pursued several sexual relationships with other women.
So she wasn't out in the way that we would talk about that term now, but she wasn't shy about going out in public with the people she had relationships with.
Today's concepts of being gay or lesbian didn't apply in the mid-19th century. In fact, these labels weren't even used.
Same-sex passion in that period is viewed as something that is, to some degree, normal. Although it's the sexual explicitness, that's the line that polite society doesn't want crossed.
Cushman was mindful of not crossing that line.
For instance, she told almost all of her lovers not to share her letters or to even burn them. So she was very careful about how she wanted to guard her sexual experiences and her relationships.
Women living with women, even as life partners, was acceptable. Society called it a Boston marriage.
In fact, that was viewed by most people in society as a very chaste and pure thing to do. And then what happened behind closed doors happened behind closed doors, and nobody quite knew.
Another artist of the era wanted to blast those doors open.
Walt Whitman is the first great American artist. He's the poet of emotions.
His masterpiece, Leaves of Grass, was labeled obscene for its outspoken and sensuous nature.
Whitman wanted it to be improper. He was standing outside of American society, and he was creating something completely revolutionary. The frontispiece for Leaves of Grass shows him very handsome with open-throated shirt. He's standing there with sort of hands on hips with the hat cocked back on his head. Like, yeah, you're coming at me? I'm Walt Whitman.
He was also not shy about sexuality and wove homoerotic themes into his poetry.
It's impossible to miss it, particularly in the Calamus poems, but also the 28 men nude bathing in Leaves of Grass.
But despite having male lovers, Whitman didn't identify as gay.
Walt Whitman, like Charlotte Cushman, lives in this period where homosexuality as an identity doesn't exist. He's expressing whatever his passionate feelings are, sort of regardless of what decorum and respectability might say.
Yet Whitman paid a price for bearing his soul. He never saw the commercial success that Cushman did. but his artistic legacy would far surpass hers.
He was able to define a new vision, a more inclusive vision of the United States in a way that no one had ever done before.
So you have the extraordinary situation where a gay man becomes the voice of American democracy precisely because he's outside of it.
Other cultures were more open to individuality. In 1886, Smithsonian anthropologist Matilda Stevenson invited Wewa, a Zuni artisan, to come to Washington, D.C.
Stevenson is introducing her as a Zuni priestess, as a somewhat exotic person to perform native culture within the capital in various ways.
Truth is, Wewa was not a priestess. In fact, Wewa was male-bodied with a female identity.
There's every indication that Stevenson, in the beginning, did not know that Wewa was a man. And Washington society accepted him as a woman.
Wewa charmed the Washington elite with Zuni culture and skill as a weaver. Being male-bodied was, by all accounts, inconsequential.
Within Washington society, there is no concept in those days of transgender. So it's not even an option at that point to have that kind of discussion. People were willing to stretch their understanding of someone because they're not of their culture.
Wewa donated this loom to the Museum of Natural History, where two Zuni guests have offered to shed light on Wewa's role in their culture.
It's just a different way of acting than your gender, of having not a gender bias, but just accepting who people are. And that was Tlahma.
Tlahma.
The word Tlahma is referring to specifically a male that has female characteristics or a personality. And it's always been accepted in Zuni as something that is natural.
Wewa was also gifted with clay. Not only did they make ceremonial baskets like this one, they broke Zuni tradition by taking on the female task of pottery.
It was just a woman's role, the women's job to make pottery. It was bad luck to have men around when the women were firing the pots. But now it's changed. And now there's a lot of famous, well-known potters that are men. And I think might have been Wewa is the reason why it changed.
This was a person that was just a gifted artist, and she's made a very big impact and contribution to the community.
So it sounds as though if Wewa is a role model today for Zunis, it's not just about gender, it's really as an artist.
And the sexual orientation and preference for Wewa was just secondary.
And I think that's one of the good traits of being a Zuni is that, you know, we're very open. We're not biased in how we want people to be.
Well, most indigenous people around the world have really different understandings of gender identity and sexuality than Judeo-Christian European traditions. Homosexual becomes a term around the 1890s forward, and it's a pathology. It's a term used to describe a disease or a mental illness.
In the 20th century, being different would become dangerous in new ways.
You're going to be marked as psychologically unfit, a pedophile, you know, someone who is a scar on society.
This police booking card from 1915 has been preserved at the National Museum of American History. Countless like it were issued across America for men who broke a very specific law.
Mr. Mooney was picked up for what would be in the vernacular called cruising at a railway station in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
The law called it sodomy.
You have this man being penalized for at least trying to find someone like himself.
Police could raid your home in the privacy of whatever you were doing and arrest you. Even if you were suspected, you could be arrested.
Mooney was convicted and sent to jail for 3 years.
It totally symbolizes the idea of criminalization of same-sex relationships.
Sodomy laws outlawed what were deemed to be unnatural sexual acts and would remain on the books in many states as late as 2003.
People were afraid of us. People stigmatized us. They arrested us, harassed us. We had to watch our backs all the time.
Those brave enough to pursue gay relationships through most of the 20th century did it in secret, leading invisible lives.
I'm reaching out. Well, I'm reaching out.
These are love letters addressed to a man by several different men during World War II.
Tell me your dreams, are you waiting for me? Show me your heart.
The Philip St. George letters tell the story of a man who seems to have been closeted, but was trying to pass as straight.
I'm reaching out for love.
They talk about how they're feeling in a way that men at that time were not allowed to do, certainly openly, and certainly if you were in the military.
In many ways, the war actually helped gay people feel less alone.
You do have men and women coming from all parts of the United States, and they're being thrown together in sometimes very close quarters, and they're finding out that, oh, wow, I am not the only one like this in the world.
And they start comparing notes. They form alliances. They have lots of sex. They feel empowered.
It was a liberating time for the gay community to accept and understand its identity.
Now, of course, the community was underground, and especially in the military, but this definitely sowed the seeds of let's get together and let's see how we can actually change society.
Still, few came out openly for fear of being court-martialed or worse. And back home, there were growing efforts to stamp out homosexuality altogether.
There were enough medical physicians who thought being gay was a medical condition that could be cured.
Throughout much of the 20th century, gay men and women were involuntarily committed to psychiatric facilities by their families in hopes of getting the gay out.
They used drugs. They put people into comas to alter their minds. They used electroconvulsive shock treatment to rewire the brain or short-circuit the brain.
Basically, this involved showing the gay man pictures of nude males and shocking him with a strong electric current.
Lobotomy was another brutal procedure intended for all sorts of mental disorders. This tool was used by Dr. Walter Freeman.
Freeman's technique was you go in behind the eye through the eye socket and you just wiggle it to disconnect the frontal lobe from the rest of the brain.
Typically, this removed any personal drive, but often left patients severely disabled. Of the thousands of lobotomies Freeman performed, roughly 40% were on homosexuals. These extreme methods were part of a larger effort to suppress LGBTQ people. And by the 1950s, a new movement set out to stop it. These magazines are from one of the earliest pro-gay organizations in America.
In some ways, the mantra was, we're going to fit in and then we'll be accepted. We're going to educate the American populace that this is not something abhorrent or out of the ordinary. We are members of society just like you.
Groups like the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis were founded in the 50s to establish a safe, underground culture for gays and lesbians.
What adults do willingly in private is their own affair. And their real main reason for existing was to serve as support groups and trying to push for some equal rights, but in a non-confrontational way.
It was called the homophile movement, meaning loving the same. And one of its most outspoken activists was Frank Kameny.
We're going to go out, we're going to march, we're going to be much more vocal, much more visible, and we're going to be who we are.
In 1957, Kameny, a Harvard-trained physicist, sued the US government when it fired him for being gay.
He was not successful, but he certainly did not lay down and just walk away like so many others. He was a little bit of a firebrand, or a lot of bit of a firebrand, actually.
Diversity doesn't have to imply threat.
He radicalizes himself.
Kameny took his fight to the White House in 1965.
He's doing this with his long-term activist partner, Barbara Giddings, and sort of proudly stating, I'm a gay man, I'm a lesbian woman, and I am demanding my rights.
Every American citizen has the right to be considered by his government on the basis of his own personal merits as an individual.
Kameny and Giddings took their pickets to Philadelphia on July 4th and demonstrated in front of Independence Hall annually for the next 4 years. Fellow Mattachine member Lily Vincennes filmed the event in 1968. Kameny would later use the simple phrase, "gay is good," to say that homosexuals were upright citizens like everyone else. They even dressed the part.
They thought that all women should look like housemakers of the 1950s, and all men should look like the guys who work on Madison Avenue with suit and ties.
We're just going to march, and we're going to have our placards, and we're going to show you that, oh my gosh, you know, they look just like my neighbor next door.
But their polite request for equal rights was drowned out as the 1960s became more politically charged.
There was this tension across the country to be more visible, more active, more confrontational.
The younger generation was tired of playing by the rules.
We are done with this. You know what? We're going to live our lives.
It was time for us to fight back.
Down in Greenwich Village, the New York night is, well, it's different.
Mark Siegel was 18 when he moved away from his family in 1969 and came to Greenwich Village, a well-known bohemian district in New York City.
When I was 18 years old, I knew I was gay, but I didn't even know what the right word for it was.
Like many other gay runaways, Mark landed on Christopher Street and hung out in Christopher Park.
And this became my home. Our friends here were everybody you can imagine. We just accepted each other and were proud to be with each other because we were ourselves. And that was one of my hangouts, Stonewall. I would usually go to the end of the bar, and that's where my friends, street kids, drag queens, would hang out.
Among the regulars were Marsha Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Both Johnson and Rivera worked the streets and performed for money. And like most Stonewall customers, they were regularly harassed by the police.
We were second, third, fourth-class citizens, but this place, allowed us to be here. We could be arrested out on the street, so this was safe.
On June 28th, 1969, Mark had been in New York just 6 weeks.
So that night, I was in the bar, and all of a sudden, the lights started flickering on and off. I looked over the person next to me, I said, "What's going on?" And they were casual. They said, "Oh, just another raid." That set off alarm bells inside me. I was nervous as hell. And the police had no use for me. They're going after the drag queens. They're throwing insults around. But me, they just carted me and let me out. And I was glad to get out of the bar.
When Mark got outside, a small crowd was gathered around the entrance.
People would start applauding when someone got out. People started saying things to the police as the door would open. And the most vocal and loudest were the drag queens. They had nothing to lose.
Stand up stronger.
Everything society could take away from you had already taken away from them. This was their home. Somebody threw something at the door. Ruckus started. Police came out of the door chasing somebody. Then they went inside because they felt endangered. The police barricaded themselves inside the bar. Basically, all hell broke loose.
By the time police reinforcements arrived, Christopher Street had filled with several hundred people.
Police came out, people dispersed, people ran down that street. They ran up various other streets, Bleecker Street, Gay Street. They just were all over here. It was one of the greatest nights in the history for gay people.
By 4 a.m., the riot squad finally dispersed the crowds. But for Mark and his friends, the rebellion had just begun.
Marty Robinson came up to me and hands me a piece of chalk, at which point he says, go up and down the street and write on the walls and the street, tomorrow night, Stonewall. Tomorrow night, Stonewall. And we did that all the way down to Silver Dollar Restaurant, all the way up to Greenwich Avenue.
Word spread quickly, and the following night, thousands filled the area. The uprising continued over the next few days, often turning violent as demonstrators clashed with police and declared their independence.
Never let society define us ever again. We are who we are, out loud and proud. We were going to be in your face. We were going to demand rights. And standing right here at one of those moments, in my head somewhere, I said, this is what I want to do the rest of my life.
Within weeks, Mark, Marsha Johnson, and other activists formed the Gay Liberation Front, uniting gay men, lesbians, and transgender people in the fight against oppression and inequality.
First thing we did was to identify ourselves. We were no longer homosexuals. That was a clinical term, and we didn't relate to that.
My mother knows I'm gay. My father lives in Los Angeles and does not know I'm gay. And I'm proud of it. Right on, right.
That was a point of no return in the sense of accepting themselves and being out there. And whether my family accepts me or not, this is important to me now. I want to be a full American citizen.
And to celebrate their independence, they chose the first anniversary of the Stonewall Riots to stage the Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day Parade.
We're going to dare to be ourselves, really be out there. We're going to have a parade right down one of the most famous avenues in New York City.
On June 28th, 1970, thousands marched from Christopher Street up 6th Avenue, all the way to Central Park.
Gay people actually leaving the village and walking where good, upright citizens live and work every day right across Manhattan.
Simultaneous marches were held in Chicago, LA, and San Francisco. They were the first gay pride marches that have been held annually in cities across the US ever since. Mark's original sticker and donation can now live at the Smithsonian.
That little sticker, which was the most we could afford to promote that first gay pride, 1970, 1 year after Stonewall, was a statement unto itself.
While many were demanding visibility and acceptance within mainstream culture, some began rejecting the entire system.
They're starting their own groups that are women-only spaces. They're questioning patriarchy, they're questioning feminism, they're questioning religion.
Women-only communes like the Furies adopted a feminist version of Wicca, a neo-pagan religion.
Separatist Wiccan groups worship the goddess or Mother Earth, try to revive old religious practices that don't include the power of men.
While feminist Wiccan practices gained popularity through the 70s and early 80s, the larger LGBTQ movement continued to grow. In 1979, just 10 years after Stonewall, more than 50,000 people marched on Washington for gay and lesbian rights. The future was looking brighter until a mysterious killer began taking gay lives. In the early 1980s, doctors began reporting strange symptoms in gay male patients.
1981, we began to hear about the first cases of what was being called the gay cancer.
Men's immune systems were failing catastrophically.
In the initial stages, your life was over within a few weeks.
No one could identify the source of the disease.
If it is contagious, which we don't know, really, but if it is a contagious agent, then it is transmitted by very, very close personal contact.
And some hospitals were refusing to take patients. Some funeral homes wouldn't take the bodies. They were being left in alleyways.
As panic mounted, the government did little for research efforts.
Some religious people said, you know, this is God's plague on those people. God is striking you down.
2 years would pass before they discovered the virus and gave it a name: HIV. By that time, more than 3,000 had died.
At one point, you're just going to, every weekend was a funeral. And it angers you because nothing was being done.
Demonstrators demanded that more be done to find a cure. In October 1987, activists descended on Washington, D.C. to honor those who died of AIDS, with what would become the largest traveling memorial in the world.
The AIDS quilt is a unique and interesting phenomenon.
Nearly 2,000 panels with the names of the dead were laid out on the National Mall, covering a space larger than a football field.
They had boxes of tissues because everyone was crying. I found the names of some of my friends. We have a quilt panel from Roger Lyons, who testified in Congress saying famously, "Don't let my epitaph be I died of red tape," because Congress wasn't ponying up, wasn't paying attention, didn't care.
The quilt continued to grow, toured other cities, but it always returned to Washington with a clear message.
Let us show you the devastation. This is how large it has grown. And this is but a mere microcosm of how many people have passed.
The AIDS epidemic was not exclusive to the gay community, and HIV continues to claim lives around the world. But the AIDS crisis hit closer to home than mainstream America expected. Not only were family members dying, so were popular celebrities.
One of the hallmarks of that was when Rock Hudson died. Here was the ultimate American male. Big, brawny, deep voice. Always in a movie with some really great-looking actress. And lo and behold, Rock Hudson was gay. Yes, indeed, even the person that you think could possibly no way in the world be gay is gay.
As the impact of the AIDS crisis rippled out, Broadway hits like Rent and Torch Song Trilogy exposed millions of Americans to sympathetic gay characters.
Representation really matters. The more you see characters of different backgrounds, the more you understand that they are your neighbors, that you share the same concerns, and this is really what's important about entertainment.
Then, in 1998, television brought gay lead characters into American homes.
One sweet. Was that Danny?
Yeah. Jealous?
Honey, I don't need your man. I got George Clooney.
Sorry, babe. He doesn't bat for your team.
Well, he hasn't seen me pitch.
Will and Grace is really unique because it took this idea of a normal sitcom of people living in a city and they could be your neighbors and added gay characters to the mix.
That's just a straight guy's way of thinking that you and I could ever be a couple.
Okay, first of all, Will should only be so lucky. Okay, so let's just clear that right up.
The producers of Will and Grace were gracious enough to bring us some of the objects from the show's production. So we have the pilot script for the show, so you can see the evolution of the script as they wrote it out.
My one-night stand on Fire Island.
Latin things!
Good. And a cane. A railing.
Ah! Oh, come on, another clue!
Each other.
Things that you lean on!
That's it!
Not only did America get to see us, they got to laugh with us.
They just kind of normalized being gay and made it just really popular and fun.
Though not the first to introduce gay characters on TV, Will and Grace would win 18 Emmy Awards over 8 seasons and have a lasting impact on the LGBTQ community.
Joe Biden said in 2012 when he came out for gay marriage that Will and Grace had done more to advance this cause than anything else.
But the show's reach wasn't strong enough to eliminate hatred. Just 2 weeks after Will and Grace made its debut, a horrifying event sparked national outrage.
Matthew Shepard is murdered in a brutal hate crime in Wyoming. You think things are going well, and then something like that happens.
On October 7th, 1998, Matthew Shepard, a gay 21-year-old student, was found tied to a split-rail fence in a prairie outside the town where he went to college. He had been beaten savagely with a pistol.
He's murdered by 2 young men about his age who thought they wanted to rob him, pretended to be gay.
Shepard's murder was widely condemned as a brutal hate crime against gays. Within months, his parents would launch the Matthew Shepard Foundation.
We decided to set up this foundation in Matt's name to use this money in a way to help younger LGBT folks have a better, safer life.
Their work would help pass the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act,
Our capacity to love,
signed by President Obama in 2009.
I'm pretty sure Matt would be pretty astounded that his story is the one that people are using to define change for the LGBT community.
20 years after his murder, Matthew Shepard's parents donated many of his belongings to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History.
Even though he's become this mythic icon, he's much more than how he was murdered.
It's the difference between Matthew and Matt.
Matthew is someone who's considered maybe even a martyr to some people. Matt is just a kid.
The lips really caught my eye.
I received those for a Valentine's gift from Matt. It was about 7, probably. And after that day, I put it in his lunch when he would go to school. So he'd have a kiss for me at lunch.
Oh, and he never lost it.
No, he never lost it. One of the few things he never lost.
He was just a kid. Like other kids, he liked Superman. He had a dog. He liked theater. He liked politics. He was so familiar the way all kids are.
We do not consider Matt to be our gay son. We do consider him to be our son who happened to be gay. Just like he happened to have blue eyes, he happened to have blonde hair.
What really matters is who you are on the inside, your core self. Are you a good citizen? Are you a kind person?
This ring, it's one of those intense objects that capture a side of somebody. Did you know he did this?
I did not know. This really, to me, exemplifies the hope he had for the future. He was very concerned that as a gay man, he might not ever be able to share his life with someone in the legal sense. So to me, this represents hope.
He was a pretty optimistic kid.
Dreamed of a happy ever after.
Yeah. To think about his aspiration, his hope, his wanting to fall in love and have a family, be married, meet someone, to have a life ahead of him are all really packed into that ring.
Like many before him, Matt Shepard paid a heavy price for being himself.
He's the one who said it. God hates.
And his death sparked such a hateful reaction from anti-gay groups that his parents didn't feel safe burying his ashes in a marked grave.
We were going to scatter him in Wyoming, but his brother wanted him someplace where he could visit. So we just kept him in Casper with us.
But Matt would eventually find peace in a place beyond their wildest dreams. And years later, his legacy would reverberate in unexpected places. In 2013, NBA player Jason Collins dropped a bombshell on America's #1 sports magazine. In the middle of his playing career.
There's a tremendous amount of risk because Jason Collins could not have been picked up by another team. He was a free agent. He didn't have the protections that most NBA players who are under contract have.
The 34-year-old Collins had already played 12 seasons. Many said his career was finished, until an old friend reached out.
The coach of the Brooklyn Nets at that time was his former teammate, Jason Kidd.
On Kidd's advice, the Nets signed Collins in 2014. It would be his final season with the NBA. But his first playing as an openly gay man. Number 98 could finally be himself, sharing the meaning of his uniform that had been hidden for years.
It's when he joined the Boston Celtics in 2012 that he decided to wear the number 98 because it represents the year 1998, the year that Matthew Shepard was killed in Wyoming because he was a gay man.
As a final gesture of support, Collins' teammates signed his jersey when he retired. Today, Collins works for NBA Cares, a global community outreach initiative that helps younger athletes accept their sexuality.
Each person that speaks up and lives an authentic life and speaks, their truth, it'll make it easier for the next person.
Someone like Jason Collins who comes out can become not only an inspiration for a lot of the other queer people who play sports, but also to help push manhood to be less constricting for all men.
Jason Collins risked his career going public. Gene Robinson risked his life. When he became the first openly gay bishop in the Episcopal Church in 2003.
Communion would threaten to tear. While I could be, reasonably anonymous gay priest in New Hampshire, people around the world knew that I was being elected a bishop for the whole church, and they were horrified by that.
Hate mail and death threats poured into his office, trying to prevent his consecration. But the New Hampshire diocese moved forward under incredibly tight security.
I was told that we had sharpshooters on the roof, we had bomb-sniffing dogs, we had policemen on horses. And I had to wear a bulletproof vest. Well, I didn't have to, I mean, but I didn't want to die. I wasn't interested in being a martyr. I just wanted to be a bishop, right?
My brother, the people have chosen you and have affirmed their trust in you by acclaiming your election.
If there was an attack, an armed bodyguard would rush Robinson to a room where 3 bishops and a photographer would be waiting.
So that they could lay hands on me, make me a bishop, and we'd have a photograph to prove it. And the consecration itself wouldn't be foiled, assuming I wasn't dead.
My brothers and sisters in Christ, greet your new bishop coadjutor.
Wonderfully, none of that happened, and here I am.
Bishop Robinson has agreed to donate some of his personal objects to the Smithsonian as part of the ongoing collection for LGBTQ history.
Hi, Catherine. How are you? Come on in. So it's so great to have you here finally.
Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough.
I've actually assembled some stuff for you to look at. Take your stuff out and just throw it on the chair there.
What we got?
These were the vestments that I had made for my consecration. I'll just show them to you a little bit here.
You had to wear a flak jacket.
Yeah, so
right?
I actually wore a bulletproof vest under these vestments.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Though Robinson survived his consecration, for years after, he and his partner received death threats.
This one has got a lot of obscenity at the beginning, but
my God, how can you read that?
Yeah. You SOB, still spreading AIDS, that's the only thing you're good for. More obscenity. This one wins the most creative award for hate mail. I mean, it's like out of a 1940s grade B movie, right? Where the murderer cuts...
A ransom note or something.
I have a bullet for each of your heads when you least expect it, and that's a picture of me and Mark taken from the internet. One of the closest times I came to being killed was in 2009. We get a call from the Vermont State Police, and they say, Bishop Robinson, we've just arrested a man here, and he had a sawed-off shotgun and tons of ammunition. And we're pretty sure he was on his way to your house to ring your doorbell and blow your head off.
There was also hope and support.
The supportive ones really nourished me. I mean, I would get emails and notes and letters from, you know, some teenager in Podunk, Iowa, saying, it's the first time I've ever seen anybody put their sexuality together with their spirituality. This gives me hope about my life, which of course is why I was doing all this, right? Was for the next generation of
It saves lives.
people. Yeah,
It does,
I think so.
yeah.
I think so. So it was totally worth it.
Robinson received many tokens of love and support, including a cross made from gold objects that his parishioners donated personally.
Being able to document your journey and all of the joys and the suffering and all that you've gone through so that we can all learn. I'm so grateful to you that you trust us to be able to be good stewards, so thank you.
It's my great honor. Thanks. Thank you so much.
In October 2018, Gene Robinson helped Matt Shepard's parents finally lay their son to rest at Washington's National Cathedral.
You are safe now. Oh yeah, and Matt, welcome home.
Those were not just words for Matt. They were words for all of us. So for the Smithsonian to join in that says in a loud way, we're here, in a way that was denied us for so long. And so it's just a great honor to be invited to donate this stuff, and they can have anything they want.
Come close and look me in the eye.
This is a story about acceptance and about identity and having your place in this national narrative.
LGBTQ plus identity has been incubating for hundreds of years. So there's no one history, never will be.
I think it's time we take control.
But the LGBTQ experience is tightly woven into the fabric of American history. And as it changes with the times, Smithsonian collections reveal fascinating clues to often hidden lives.
That's what this institution does well. It makes people realize, no matter who they are, that they belong to America.
It's really important that we preserve these materials.
It comes down to respect. Can you be who you are and be safe?
It's all about enlightenment and just making this tapestry of American history that much fuller, brighter. It is becoming easier to say, this is who I am.